Good afternoon, it's Pastor Marty from the Afternoon Drive. As you may recall, yesterday I made a prophetic declaration here on the Afternoon Drive. It was simply this: that the Democrats and the mainstream media absolutely know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they cannot compete with the Donald Trump rallies and the crowds they draw. So that they would probably begin to make a comparison that, well, big crowds, that only means that he has this Hitler-esque type of hold over mass people standing in large arenas and coliseums with their right arm extended going, Zig Heil, Zig Heil, Zig Heil, and now referring to Donald Trump as Der Fuhrer. What I didn't understand was the radiant brilliance behind Joe Scarborough. I've apparently misjudged him. Here I've just thought of him as kind of a buffoon on television over there on PMSNBC, apparently their answer to Don Lemonhead on CNN. Let's take somebody totally and completely unqualified to do television and let's give him his own show. In fact, let's go ahead and make Morning Joe the kickoff to what we're going to do every day in our broadcast day, and we'll call it something really cool like Morning Joe. I am glad they finally got him to take off the glasses. He put those on trying to make himself look smarter, and he really only ended up looking like Mr. Magoo. So here's Morning Schmuck and his pole dancing wife, Mika Brzezinski, sitting there giving us the real insight into what happened at the Trump rally in Orlando, Florida.
It's starting to feel really shticky. The thing of the transgression, the rule breaking, the stuff that obviously worked for him in 2016, and now it just feels like it's like a greatest hits, a K-Tel greatest hits collection, and they sound a little dated.
I got it.
These songs sound a little dated.
I mean, no disrespect to the king of rock and roll. But this is Elvis in 77. Yeah. Just kind of lumbering across the stage, sweating.
Yeah,
that was
or at Graceland in front of like the 6 televisions with the big, huge bottle of Quaaludes.
Okay.
All
right.
You just took it too far.
Yeah, you were just a foil here.
We're
you don't want to bring it into the gutter.
On-stage performances, but it is getting old. I mean, seriously.
It's Elvis.
It's Elvis
sweating.
Late
in 77, sweating, trying to sing the old hits, but his heart's just not really in it.
Elvis, really, that's the best you can do. That Donald Trump is now the 42-year-old, overweight, out of shape, drug-addicted Elvis Presley. Now, before I respond to the absolute idiocy, which is Joe Scarborough and the schmucks that he has on that he calls panelists, let me just tell you a thing or two about Elvis, something I happen to know a little bit about, because not only am I a pastor, and not only do I do talk radio, but I'm also an oldies DJ. I have a syndicated oldies program called Sunday Matinee. It's 2 hours of 1950s, early 1960s rock and doo-wop. I just took a vacation with my wife to Memphis, Tennessee. We made the pilgrimage, stayed at the Graceland Guest House Hotel, right next door to Graceland, took the Graceland tour, toured all of the Elvis museums. I stood in Sun Studios, and I'll be talking about that later on one of my oldie shows. I do know a little something about Elvis. And a couple of things I would like to point out to Morning Schmuck. Though we understand that at the end of Elvis's life, he didn't look his best, nor did he certainly feel his best. And that was at the fault of one doctor in particular who just kept him doped up on legal prescription drugs. And at the time, different mindset. I know liberals and libloons and propaganda artists like Joe Scarborough have a really hard time with the truth and putting things into proper historical perspective. But there was a time that you just assumed that if the doctor gave it to you, it was okay. That you weren't really a drug addict. It wasn't really a problem because a doctor did this to you. So there was a doctor writing the prescriptions. You had, at the time for Elvis, a manager who himself was a degenerate gambler, owed money everywhere, and here he had the greatest entertainment star literally in the history of America, and all he saw him for was a cash cow that he kept pipping out night after night after night after night. When the man obviously needed to come off the road, he needed to be surrounded by people that saw the destruction that he was doing to himself, to get him off of what he was on, to let him have, even if it took up to a full year, off the road of just recovery, rest, and recuperation. Unfortunately, he didn't have that. But isn't it amazing that even at that stage of his life and career, every show was sold out. He continued to sell records, still does to this day. I believe the last count was something around 3 billion records sold. That's billion with a B. 3 Grammy Awards. Hundreds of gold records. Platinum records. Double platinum records. Hundreds and hundreds of awards. He was a pioneer of the early genre of rock and roll, and you can debate that his movies of the 1960s were a bit on the cheesy side, but you know, there were a lot of cheesy movies in the 1960s, not just Elvis movies, some of John Wayne's westerns from the 60s, some of the other singers who were doing movies at that time, Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. Those movies a little on the cheesy side. Even some of the established artists of the day, like Tony Curtis. You know, cheesy and 1960s, it kind of goes together. That was the movie genre of the time. You do understand, though, that in the 1960s, Elvis was the single highest paid actor in Hollywood. He got $1 million per movie, plus 50% of the profits. And every Elvis movie made money. So somebody went to see them. And then, in the late 1960s, he made his comeback in Vegas. And then ultimately in the 1970s, we had Tour Elvis. And Elvis, right up to 1976, he looked great. He was a picture of health. He took care of himself. And within the last year to year and a half of his life, he did go into declining health. Again, under a doctor's care and a manager who didn't do right by him. That all said, how many people have made their living even today impersonating Elvis, doing tribute to Elvis? Can you think of, seriously now, any other entertainer, and we'll just limit this to the United States, who draws 2 to 3 million post-death visits to his home? And now there's actually 2 places to go and experience Elvis after death. Graceland and Memphis, Tennessee, and basically the entire city of Memphis. And I had an opportunity, my wife and I, we got out in what we call the local areas of Memphis. We stayed away from some of the other touristy places. We even stayed away from Beale Street. But we went to little mom and pop diners and places, and we met people who actually knew Elvis. Met his 83-year-old auto mechanic. Met the daughter of one of his bodyguards and spent some time with her. Harry, the man has been dead now 40 plus years, and yet 2 million visitors a year still make their way to Graceland. Do 2 million people a year go see Frank Sinatra's home? Johnny Cash's home? Pick the artist. Pick the genre. Pick the entertainment field. The man made a lasting mark on our culture, and to this day is still influencing new musicians, and even singers like Bruno Mars got their start as Elvis impersonators. That all said, what Joe Scarborough cannot handle is that Donald Trump, like an Elvis, is an absolute cultural icon who has in just 2.5 years changed the look and the outlook of America, and for the better. You heard what I said, for the better. His tariff threat to Mexico, and I don't care what the Mexican officials are saying about it today, his tariff threat to Mexico, it did force them to get engaged now in this crisis that we have at the border. 3 major corporations are now pulling out of China because of the trade war that Donald Trump has with China. And though the state media of China will not yet tell us, we are beginning to see the effects here in America. It's working. And I love what President Trump said in his rally in Orlando. We're going to win this trade war. And we're going to establish good trade with China. And if we don't, oh well, we'll just build the stuff here. Boom, Shazam, Batman. They don't get it. The liberal elites, the libloons, they don't get it. What we have in Donald Trump is an actual M-A-N, a man, a leader. He stands up for the working class. He has stood up against countries who have been ripping us off for decades. Even today, talking tough with Iran, yet at the same time saying, we'll wait to see all the evidence come in to see if this was really directed by the Iranian government or a loose cannon within the regime that acted on his own and took out one of our drones. And by the way, if this was a loose cannon within the regime, the president's going to have to do a thing. The Iranian Ayatollahs will take care of that. That all said, a Trump rally outdraws any single Democratic candidate. And the media knows it. And Joe Scarborough, trying to compare him to an overweight has-been Elvis, who really doesn't even understand Elvis's history, he doesn't get it either. The Daily Caller recently took a camera crew to an event where 9 Democratic presidential candidates had gathered together, including Bernie Sanders. 9 of them at a single event, at a single venue, and 200 people showed up. Period. 200.
Freedom means that you can and must live in a clean climate.
Joe Biden launched his campaign, or did a relaunch in Iowa, drew 85 people. That was just a couple of weeks ago. Donald Trump goes to Orlando, Florida. People start lining up 45 to 48 hours before the event actually happened. 150,000 requests for passes. 25,000 people made it inside the arena. Another 10,000 plus people outside the arena. And he says that the president is just lumbering across the platform, singing the songs everybody knows and nobody cares. Really? Because CNN dropped the feed right after the entire crowd began chanting, CNN sucks, CNN sucks, CNN sucks. The president fired up the crowd with his attacks on Joe Biden, his pointing out the obvious regarding Hillary Rodham Clinton. And don't make a mistake. Don't think for a moment that Scarborough's got this thing right. President Trump gets energized from the people. This was just a warm-up. We got a year and a half to go. And Joe Biden's numbers are already beginning to tank, and he's lost the major firm that was handling all of his advertising and promotion because his past comments regarding segregation and being in favor of it are now coming back to haunt Mr. Biden. So, Joe Scarborough is an enigma to me because he's the has-been who never was. He never did fully account for the dead intern in his office when he was a member of Congress. And the only reason he is so viscerally anti-Trump today has nothing to do with his so-called political convictions. Joe Scarborough doesn't have any. He's mad because Donald Trump didn't welcome he and Mika into his inner circle at Mar-a-Lago and make him part of his elite group of friends. He's like a woman scorned, and that's exactly how he acts day in and day out on the morning schmuck show that nobody watches, and the Cartoon Network has higher ratings in the morning than Joe Scarborough does. And yet he wants to talk about Trump rallies being old and tired. Let me tell you what's old and tired, in particular in the area of media. Cable news networks who have a host and a panel of guests. They pick a topic and then they talk about it ad nauseum. Day in, day out. Ooh, Joe, real cutting edge. You're just, young people and millennials can't wait to get up every morning and find out what cutting edge Joe Scarborough has to say about anything. Nothing at all. So, Joe, honestly, do yourself a favor. Go away. Aren't you tired of embarrassing yourself enough? Because I know some of us, we're really not tired of pointing out the obvious to the masses. And that is the fact that you are a sham. You are fake news personified. And when you put on idiots like that Donny Deutsch, you're only proving the fact that you can't even draw any real talent or any real intellects to come on there and discuss things of actual importance. But hey, have a morning cup of Joe and enjoy your morning with Joe Schmuck and Mika Brzezinski. Yeah, I think I'll pass. I'd rather have a colonoscopy instead. Well, that's it. That's today's rant. Thank you so much for tuning our way. Please make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, and smack the bell to get notification of my next rant.